Okay, today we're going to take this OEM tank, and there does appear to be some rust inside. It's been sitting for such a long time. So going to try to take a look, see if we can seal this and get it all coated again. Obviously there's rust all over. It's been sitting probably for about 2 or 3 years almost. So we'll take a look inside, see how bad it is, and then use some POR 15 fuel tank repair liquids that I got, and we'll see how good this turns out. 1 quart of degreaser to 1 quart of warm water. Instructions say not to use hot water because that can soften any adhesives that are inside. Not sure if this one has any adhesives. I would imagine they would be referring to newer tanks, but you never know. So we're going to pour that in there. We already got some metal chain in there that I had left over from fixing some old double hung windows, the type that had the weights inside the frames. I had a bunch of that chain left over, so I threw some of that in there, probably about, I would imagine, 8 or 10 feet. But now the instructions says to shake it around for about 30 minutes to make sure everything's covered and the chain loosens up as much material as possible. It also says you can use nuts, bolts, or some small ball bearings such as BBs, so on and so forth. But I figured I had the chain, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. So I'm going to go ahead and shake this around for about 30 minutes, and we'll touch base when I get back. I'm going to go ahead and cover everything up. That way it'll make it easier to turn the tank upside down and so on and so forth. Get that metal chain going around all over the place. Okay, that's 30 minutes, and wow, that felt like my workout for the week. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and open it up and see how much actually got loosened up. Just opened the garage door a little bit to allow it to flow out. That looks pretty scrubbed up. I mean, I would imagine that chain worked better than nuts and bolts because it's dragging instead of bouncing all over the place like nuts would, or bolts, or BBs. I don't know, maybe rolling around does the same effect, but I figured this one would be more of like using an SOS pad inside, using this chain that's used for double hung windows. But wow, it got a lot of it out. Granted, there wasn't much grease in there, but it seems like it did pretty good. And we see the chain inside there sloshing around. So that seems to have worked pretty decently. It's just a little tough getting the light in there along with this. But yeah, it's definitely looking a little better in there. See if we can get a little closer or not, but not really. But we'll get the scope in there later on and take a look and see if there's a lot of a, much of a difference in how it was before versus later. So I'm going to go ahead and just fill the tank up with water right now and then just pour it out, and let's see if any more comes out. Alright, let's see. so at this point the instructions say to continue, I mean, you basically rinse it out after you've got that degreaser running around in there, which is what we did. And the instructions basically just say to repeat the process with the second quart if necessary, but like I said, this tank really didn't have much grease or any other kind of sediment in there, so to speak. So instructions say the tank doesn't have to be bone dry. I'm just going to air it out a little bit with some compressed air. Let this chain hang somewhere else so we can get it going. Alright, so now we're going to put in the metal prep. Basically, it says to run this in there and slosh it around, making sure you get every single part in the area, in all the areas. One of the other things that it said was to roll the tank around to ensure it coats all surfaces. But it wants you to put the tank in different positions every half hour until the entire inside of the tank has been treated with the prep. And then you just got to rinse it out with warm water several times and drain it, making sure you get all the low spots out of there and try to get out as much of the water as possible. And then at that point they do recommend blowing the tank out with some warm air, even suggesting you use like a hair dryer or a hot air gun, and not to use unfiltered compressor air. I guess that would probably just increase the possibility of getting some flash rust inside. I do have some filters on my compressor, but I think I will opt for using the hot air gun since I have that on hand. So basically we're just gonna pour this in now. I've got everything sealed. And then it's really just a matter of sloshing it around and letting it sit in different positions to make sure everything gets treated. So I guess while that happens, they don't really suggest or say how much time you need to do this for. It just says to do it every half hour, making sure you move the tank around. But it says once the metal is treated, it can flash rust, though the coating is designed to bond with any new flash rust. Ideally you want to perform the forced air drying promptly after draining the tank and coat the tank with sealant soon after drying it. So that's why we're doing this right away. So basically it just says to keep it wet for 30 or 20 minutes. But then again on here, it's basically telling you, and it does tell you that it should be empty of rinsing, a tank should be empty of rinsing water, but does not have to be bone dry before using the POR metal prep. And it tells you to pour this prep in there, roll it around to ensure all coats all surfaces. Place it in different positions every half hour until the entire inside of the tank has been treated. And then rinse it with warm water several times to drain it. But still, in no point, here it says to move it around every 30 minutes. But then on here, it's basically telling you to let it sit for 20 minutes. Which is keep surface wet for 20 minutes, then rinse thoroughly with water. Remove excess from paint, blah, blah, blah. So I guess we're just going to move it around, and I guess I'll move it around and slosh it around for a total of 30 minutes and just make sure everything's coated. But I'm going to seal the openings here with some of this aluminum foil tape just to make sure everything's sealed. Now this is called duct tape, but it's aluminum duct tape, which is used usually by HVAC crews to seal up all of the air ducts. Basically wherever there's a small air leak that could, let some of the air out instead of it being circulated through all of the ductwork. It does work pretty good. I've used that when doing some duct work as well. So I'm pretty sure it's going to hold everything pretty well in there and not leak out pretty much at all. So let's just go ahead and keep an eye on the clock here. Keep doing this until hit about the I guess the 30-minute mark. I'm just going to keep moving it around because I would imagine you're going to let it sit in one position or another, and then just move it after a while. But I guess if you're doing it manually, it's a lot less, I would imagine a lot less time, because you're going to be doing it continuously and just moving it around rather than having to walk away, do something else, and then come back and get to this. So I'm going to keep doing this, and we'll come back once we get that to that 30-minute mark or so, and we'll rinse it out and go on from there. Okay, so I've been sloshing this around for about 15 minutes so far. I've got everything sealed. I had to go with a different type of just plastic to go around here with the rubber band, because that aluminum duct foil tape was not quite sealing as well as I thought it was, especially down at the bottom. And one of the things, this is actually where the reserve fuel tank valve goes. And one of the things I noticed, I forgot to take one item out, which, in case many of you haven't seen it before, was this piece, which is apparently the fuel filter that comes from the factory inside of the gas tank. And it did have some rust all over it, so this will have to be rinsed out. I'll probably use some a different rust removal product that I've gotten before to clean rust off of different tools. It's that Evapo Rust. You can look that up, I think. So it does work pretty good. So this will have to be cleaned out and everything before it goes back in. I'll probably also have to clean out any rust that's built up in there, probably with a little Dremel tool, before I do the sealer. But I just figured it'd be a good thing to show, since it's one of those things that not many of us get to see from time to time, or often I should say. And as you can see, it's probably about 4 to 5 inches long, and it is a metal mesh product. Basically just goes right through and cleans off everything before it goes down to the engine. So for those of you wondering what the fuel filter looks like inside of a tank, that's the one. And makes me wonder why I need another fuel filter further down the line, but I mean, especially since this one catches everything. unless you just wanted to omit this and put, what's that called, the petcock in on here to run the fuel directly. But I think I'll put one of these back in after I clean it, provided there's no holes in it, which it doesn't feel like there is. It's still pretty flexible, so I think this will be good. But I'll clean this one off with the evapor rust, and we'll put it back in once everything's going back together. Alright, we've been sloshing this around already for about 30 minutes actually. With all sides, I think we're ready for rinse. So let's see if anything comes out of here. Well, there's still some sediment that's come out, so this metal prep has actually loosened up a few more pieces of rust inside. So let's go ahead So I'm going to keep rinsing that for a few more times, and then we'll come back to it once we start to blow dry everything out and get it all dried out. Alright, so we got everything rinsed out. Now it's just a matter of drying it out with some warm air. They don't recommend using compressed air to blow it out. I don't know if it's because the potential for unfiltered air and moisture to get in there, or the speed, and maybe just creating flash rust to form faster, whereas this actually just warms it up and I guess gets it to evaporate a little more naturally. So we're going to go ahead and do this, and we'll come back once everything is dried out. Just to give you an idea of how warm air can get this done, I mean, obviously you can tell that it's just drying everything right out with the heat. And granted, this isn't a very hot setting. I would say it's kind of like the low setting right now, whereas the high setting Alright, so we had the hair dryer in there for about 15-20 minutes. Got the outside as well. Got a light down in there. We put the scope in there, and it does seem like everything's dried out. There are some like small little marks of rust left, but I would imagine that's probably leftover residue that's going to wind up getting sealed up anyway. I mean, I'm sure there's only so much you can get out of there, unless you were running that chain in there for, back and forth, or nuts and bolts or something for, who knows, 5, 6 hours, just to, keep it tumbling around and getting as much of that rust off of there as possible. But I think this is going to be okay. I mean, especially since I've used the POR 15, and that seems to be a product that you don't have to get all the rust off. I mean, you just have to scrape it all off and get everything that's loose, and it'll basically seal up everything to prevent any further rust. So we're going to see how this goes. Now that it's all dried out, we'll put everything else away, and we'll get it ready for pouring in the sealer. Probably just tape off some of the external areas that we don't want any of that stuff to leak out onto. But then we'll go from there, and we'll see how that goes. Alright, so we've got our sealer ready to go here. Does need some mixing, so I'll have to see how much of this actually has to be mixed up. Oh yeah, it's going to be quite a bit. So we'll come back after it's all mixed up. Alright, I tried mixing this in the can, but there was like a lot of sludge residue at the bottom, even after stirring it for quite a while. So I poured it into another container just to see if I can get a better mix, but it was pretty much full to the top, so it didn't give me much room there. So I went ahead and transferred it to another one, and in the process of mixing it, I would suggest pouring it out of that can, because if you're using a paint stick like this one, you're really not going to get a lot of that sludge-like material that's settled at the bottom to mix properly. So you actually pour it out and then just go ahead and scrape all that stuff off the bottom of the can and dump it in here. But I'm going to keep stirring this and until it's all more evenly mixed. Then we'll go ahead and pour it in. Alright, I've been mixing this for a couple minutes, and it's like I don't quite get an exact mix going here. I mean, if I go nice and slow, it kind of gets distributed a little bit better. But if you go fast, I mean, you do get this other dark color that comes in, which I'm not sure why it's doing that. But I'm just going to try to get it as even as possible going this way. We'll go ahead and pour it in and see what happens. Alright, I think that's about all the mixing we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and pour it in and start moving it around. Now, take a quick look at that. See how that's looking. And oh yeah, it's coated, I'd say. Still some runoff there, but I'm sure that's gonna dry in place. I'm not too worried about this stuff on the outside because I am going to refinish the outside of the tank as well later. Put another piece on there. I should probably use the same one, just double it over so get a nice new surface on there. So I'll make sure I get a nice tight seal on there. Get another coating in that corner. Alright, I think that's going to be about it. And just check the instructions one more time. Slowly rotate the tank to cover all surface and seams. Then drain for at least 30 minutes and allow it to continue draining. So I'm going to get as much of it back into this container. For some reason they say not to reuse it. Not sure why that would be, unless it's probably in case you didn't quite get everything out of there initially, such as rust and dirt, and there might be some mixed in there. But I might try running through a sifter. No, I think it's going to be a little too thick for that, so I'm just going to somehow set it up on here so that we can let it drain properly, and I'll come out of the filler here over the next couple of hours and then give it enough time to dry. So I'll keep draining this, and we'll cover the rest once we get back. Okay, I've got the tank propped up now, trying to get it to drain out. Quite a bit has been coming out. And what's interesting is when you look inside, you can actually see some of the pigment slowly running down and then slowly coming out again. So I'm not sure what this formulation is, but overall, I mean, it is looking a lot better inside. It's a little hard to get the light in here along with the camera, but let's see if we can get a better view here. Not so much. I mean, there we go. Let's see if we can hold this steady enough to see the pigment falling. Not as much anymore. It's a very slow movement, but it does puddle up quite a bit on the bottom there. So every now and then the tank's got to be moved. You kind of see some of it pulling up inside there. It's slow, but it does come out. Now if I go ahead and drain it once again. There we go. So it does require turning it quite a few times, every few minutes, allowing it to pull. So we'll just keep doing that for a while and take a look once it stopped draining. Okay, basically strapped it all up because I was getting tired of holding it up. It is pretty slow to drain out, but it's continuous. And once you hold it in one corner, for example, it basically puddles up inside. I noticed it was puddling up in here, so I had to keep tipping it over. That's when finally I decided, instead of staying out here for about 2 or 3 hours holding this in place, I basically just got a couple of 2x4s in there and then just set it up so that all surfaces are angled and everything will drip and run down. There really isn't much of anything else where it could puddle up because I've pretty much kept moving it constantly. But even if there is something in any of these areas, it'll all run off at an angle and then go straight down. So with everything angled, such as these, it's going to angle down, hit this spot, and still run down. So I don't think there's going to be much of anything to be concerned about in terms of puddling. It does seem like everything will drain off properly, so we'll come back in a couple hours and take a look at it and see if there's any change. Although I did notice that the finish inside seems to be pretty good. But we'll see how it looks later on. I actually put a new piece of paper towel in there, so I'm going to see how much that changes in about an hour or two. Give us an idea of how much is actually still dripping out of there, or draining as they call it. Okay, I was able to leave the tank sit overnight, and dripping into some fresh paper towels. Looks like it's plenty still came out, and as noted by the small glob here from where it was dripping, I mean it's actually pretty hard. I mean, you can't really push it, so that is a pretty solid and strong material. I'll probably have to sand or grind that off just to get a nice finish around here, so that the gasket of the gas cap sits on there flush. But other than that, the interior seems to have coated pretty well, I would say. Well, maybe not well, but I'll say pretty good. I mean, I don't know if part of the runoff caused some of it to get very thin, but that's probably the best way to ensure that the bond is nice and strong in there. But other than that, and compared to the previous results, I would say it is looking pretty good. I mean, the tank itself, same thing. Hopefully you can get a zoom in on there. There we go. It does seem to have coated all of the rust that was still in there. I just wish I had a better zoom on here, or a better way to focus on that. But let me see if I can somehow get a much better focus on it. Oh, there we go. It's a little better, but it does seem to have covered all of the rust, the small little bits that were still in there. And I'll try to get in there with the scope as well and see if we can get some better looks at how everything looks inside. Okay, this is basically the results of having sanded this filler neck. I got to admit the epoxy was pretty strong, or if you can consider it an epoxy, it's actually seemed almost like an epoxy or type of a urethane slash resin type of coating on there, because it did take considerable amount of work to get all of it off of the edge of the filler neck here. The scope did show that it coated everything inside, but based on the quality of the coating that was on here, a little more confident on what the interior is like. And having looked at it through a scope, it looks pretty good, like it coated everything considerably well. So right now I'm just going to go ahead and seal these two up for the time being, just to keep any more dust from getting in there. It does have to sit for 4 days, so in the meantime I'm going to try to refinish the outside and throw either some POR15 that I've got left over from another project, or some of the Mastercraft rust sealer that I also have on hand. So I'll look to see which one is the best, and we'll start applying that in the next few hours here. Alright, just basically cleaned it all off. I'm going to try the some leftover unused PR15 rust preventive paint. It goes directly over the rust, so I don't think I should have to put any kind of a primer on here. I did have very good success with it on Volkswagen Pans as well, so I'm going to go ahead and I figured I'd use this foam brush initially because I am putting a thin coat on there right now, and I'll probably come back and put another coat. But I want to see what type of a finish this brush will provide, and then that way I can either use the same type of brush for the top coats, or whether I'm going to have to use something with a little, with more bristles on it. Another reason is these, brushes are actually really cheap, and I prefer to just throw out a used brush rather than have to go through the time of cleaning it and drying it and everything, getting everything off of there. So I do tend to use these disposable brushes for a lot of projects. But like I said, I just want to see how what kind of a finish it provides, and whether it's going to be smooth and level out, or if it's going to be a little too grainy, and maybe I'll be better off using a regular bristle brush so that we can get more of a thicker coat on there that I would imagine would level out a little better than a thin coat would. sanded down. Now we just need a quick wipe down. That's a quick way of saving a glove for another use the next day, so we'll leave that the way it is right now, and we'll check back on things tomorrow and see how it looks.